thing I've noticed a lot of people do after importing their car is start modifying it right away. In my opinion, that puts yourself at risk for some possible catastrophic failures, and I tend to go about it a different route. You have to remember, when importing these cars, especially to the United States, they're going to be minimum 25 years old unless they're imported through the show and display rule only. And even then, these cars are typically the 90s and early 2000s Japanese cars that many of us played Gran Turismo. You know, they're just, people my age, these were our dream cars growing up. It wasn't Ferraris.
Nice car. What's the retail on one of those?
More than you can afford, pal. Ferrari.
Smoke 'em.
The Japanese twin turbo era were like our bread and butter. That's what we loved. So when you have a 25-year-old car, you got to remember, it's more of a restoration process than it is a just basic maintenance.
What's wrong with it, Otto?
Needs restoration.
What?
As enjoyable as it is to modify cars, make them faster, make them handle better, make them look cooler, whatever it is you might want to do to modify the car, you have to remember there's risk involved in that. Especially when it comes to the FDRX7s. They are very sensitive when it comes to modifications. It's really easy to overlook the maintenance and get caught up in the modifications because that's really the fun part. Really easy to overlook the restoration and maintenance of an imported vehicle because of low miles. You may think that, oh, it's all good, but you got to remember, this rubber, these fluids, everything could be really old. I know, based off the Japanese Carfax I pulled on this thing, this car sat for about 10 years. I think it was around 9 or 10 years with almost no miles put on it. It does not appear to have a engine rebuilt on it. This looks like an unopened keg from the factory, but it's still really low miles. One of the biggest items I see, even when I was importing wheels, you'll see tires. They'll have tons of tread on them, but they're 10, 15, 20 years old. So it looks like you have really good tires, but in reality, you don't want to drive that on the road. You'll see these giant cracks. You get them on the highway, get some heat in them, you can risk a blowout, which then costs you a lot of body work, or worse, get you in an accident. So tires are a huge thing that often get overlooked. I've imported several wheels over the years, and most of them are really old tires on them. So that's a huge thing on my list on imported cars or importing wheels. Every fluid in the car always gets changed when I import a car. Even with this one came from a dealership. I bought this from a dealership in Japan, and they had a receipt for doing the fluids, the maintenance on this. But honestly, I'm not a very trusting person. I used to work in dealerships. I've seen what's going on. I've seen claims when people import cars and say the same thing. Fluids are all changed, but when you actually look at them, they're not. So change every fluid. All the gear oils, your transmission, your differential, whatever it may have. Some are front wheel drive. Rear wheel drive like this has a differential. You want to change that gear oil. Engine oil, your coolant you want to change. I did not change the coolant in this one only because I have a tester. I can test the quality of the coolant, see if it's turning acidic or not. I am also planning on converting over to Evans coolant this winter or spring. So this coolant will last me until then, but I just need to collect the parts to convert. Brake fluid is one of the most overlooked fluids in a car. Even non-imported cars, just your daily drivers that you've had. For those that don't know, brake fluid actually absorbs water. So if you live in a humid climate like Florida, you're more susceptible to absorbing a lot more water than if you live where I used to in Colorado. You should be flushing your brake fluid every 3 years or so. When I did my initial inspection on this car, I found my clutch master cylinder was leaking. In RX-7s, the clutch hydraulics shares the reservoir with the brake hydraulics. So I just took that opportunity to replace the clutch master, replace the rubber hose with the braided one. That rubber's 30 years old. And then I bled the whole system. You can see just how dirty it was. Obviously was not changed at the dealership. And like I said, these are frequently overlooked. Another mistake I see people make is picking their car up from the port. Even if it's on a trailer, they'll take it right to the gas station and fill it up. In my opinion, that's a big mistake. One of the first things I do is get it home. The vehicle should be really low on gas because they do not allow you to ship cars with a full tank. So you should have just enough gas to pretty much get on the boat and get off and get on the trailer. I always pull my fuel sending unit out because often you'll find that the tanks are rusted and rotted out. You may have to replace the tank or you have to go through the restoration process. This one I was lucky, it looks real clean. You can see the line on the fuel pump and on everything. You'll see a little bit of corrosion from the ethanol in the fuel. But this one really wasn't bad. Thankful for that, but it's one thing to look out for. If you have a rusty tank, then that's going to give you a lot of problems. If you fill that up right away, then you just wasted a whole tank full, and you have rust particles floating around everywhere.
Condition of imported cars will vary car by car. The same goes for how well they've been maintained. Unless you can totally confirm what has been done, I just play it safe and replace everything within reason just as a peace of mind. I use a product made by BG called 44K in pretty much all my vehicles. As a general use, 1 can of this is usually used to treat 1 tank of gas on a car this size. For a freshly imported car, I would typically throw the whole can in an empty tank of fuel, just as you would receive it from the port. Then I usually start the car, drive it around the block just enough to get a good mixture of the fuel and the cleaner, uh, park it in the garage overnight, and let the highly concentrated cleaner mixed with the fuel sit in the lines and the injectors all night. That should help break down any kind of deposits you have in there. The next day I take it and fill up the tank. After you use that whole first tank of fuel with the cleaner in it, I typically replace the fuel filter. Fuel filters are a general maintenance item. Generally, the cars that you're going to import are going to have these types of fuel filters. Many modern cars do not have a fuel filter after the fuel pump. They're fairly inexpensive, and they can range from being very easy to install or very difficult depending on your skill level. On FDRX7, they're kind of in a tedious spot above the differential. Depending on who you talk to, you can search the forums on how to. They can take you 20 minutes if you're pretty well versed in these cars and pretty knowledgeable, or they can take you a few hours from what I've been reading. Some people say you got to drop the differential on these cars to replace it, but I can assure you, you do not. Took me probably about 20 minutes, taking my time, just trying not to make a mess, dripping fuel everywhere. A few other items I chose to replace on this car are the O2 sensor and the drive belts. Again, these are general maintenance items. The O2 sensors, more specifically to RX-7s, mainly because they're exposed to the very high heat a rotary puts out, so they tend to not last very long. These are pretty cheap. They're a one-wire O2 sensor. They're not like a complicated, more modern wideband one. They do have an effect on the fueling on the car. On FDRX7, it's about a 5-minute job to replace. Just make sure you have the engine cooled off. Drive belts, again, can be pretty old. Even if the car is really low miles, these are rubber belts. If they have 10,000 miles on them and they're 30 years old, rubber tends to dry out and crack. These are fairly cheap items that, again, I replace as a peace of mind because they can leave you stranded on the side of the road if you end up breaking one. Now that you've heard my take on this topic, let me know in the comments section what you would have done different, what I may have missed. I did not include rust inspection or any kind of body damage for a reason. That's something I typically do to inspect the vehicle before I even purchase. I was mainly focusing on things I do to the car after I receive it.